The first thing Isabelle Laurent tasted when she woke was not coffee, but the distinct metallic flavor of fear. It coated the back of her throat, a residual taste from the nightmare where she'd been forced to walk, barefoot and in a wedding shroud, toward the polished black door of Senator Darius Thornware's mansion. A door she knew led not to a home, but to a beautifully appointed crypt. She was not dreaming now. The fear was real, earned by a single terrifying letter, and the silk ribbon she'd burned 2 nights prior. Isabelle, 22, slid out of bed, her bare feet meeting the cold plank floor of what had once been her mother's sun-drenched room. Now, even the sun seemed to hesitate before entering Laurel Creek. The plantation was suffocating under a miasma of failure. 6 ruinous years of cotton blight, market collapse, and the slow, grinding erosion of the Laurent name. She moved to the wash basin, splashing icy water onto her face. Her chestnut hair, thick and unruly, was quickly bound back, a necessity of austerity. She refused to look in the mirror for too long. It only showed the ghost of the determined girl she used to be, now encased in the armor of a woman fighting a war she was already losing. The only thing keeping her anchored was the knowledge she secretly possessed. A week ago, a tattered package had arrived. Inside lay a faded blue silk sash, a ribbon from the dress uniform of the late Elara Thorne, Darius' first wife, and a brittle, feverishly penned letter on cheap parchment. The letter from a former housekeeper was a desperate warning. He did not poison her with a substance, Miss Laurent. He poisoned her with solitude and indifference. He used her fragile health and her isolation to twist her mind, driving her to madness so he could claim her inheritance outright. Elara knew. She tried to tell anyone. When she realized what he was, not a husband, but a vulture, she tried to self-destruct. He merely watched. He is not looking for a wife. He is looking for a possession to dispose of on his own terms. Isabelle had burned the evidence, watching the blue silk curl into ash, but the words had not vanished. They were etched into her memory, transforming the proposal she was expecting from a miserable duty into a calculated risk of death, a slow spiritual strangulation she knew she had to enter, or risk the outright starvation of her father. She was walking into a known grave, and that conscious choice was the true source of her terror. In the dusty yard of Laurel Creek, Gaston Laurent stood next to the skeletal remains of the cotton gin, his shoulders slumped beneath an invisible, crushing weight. He held the foreclosure notice, the thick, embossed paper feeling like a branding iron in his calloused hands. The debt was unforgiving. $15,000. The deadline was absolute, 30 days. He had loved this land since birth. It was the only part of him the war hadn't taken. He'd resisted selling the ancestral silver. He'd resisted selling the last of his prime broodmares. But the land itself, the graves of his ancestors, the creek that still ran cool through the property, these were forfeit. His pride was no longer a shield. It was an anchor dragging him down. Isabelle stepped onto the porch. She did not ask about the men from the bank once she had seen them depart, their tailored black suits stark against the dying fields. "Papa, the coffee is hot. I've made your favorite cornbread." Gaston hastily folded the notice, stuffing it into his inner coat pocket, the movement jerky and shamed. "Oh, I'll be right there, Izzy." She stood her ground, her gaze steady, unrelenting. "How final is the number, Papa? Did Samuel Blackwood, the snake, mention the full sum?" Gaston looked away, focusing on the distant, hazy line of pines. He knew his daughter deserved honesty, but the truth felt like a betrayal. 30 days, 15,000. They called the full note. He paused, the words costing him a supreme effort of will. Thorne sent a preliminary proposal, before he seizes the land. Isabelle's heart hammered against her ribs. She had anticipated this, yet hearing it spoken aloud felt like the severing of her last lifeline. And what does the senator desire in exchange for his magnanimity? A life of servitude for us on the very land we built? Gaston's voice was a ragged whisper of defeat. He desires you, Isabelle. He offered to void the debt, to leave us on the land, debt-free, under the single condition of matrimony. The silence that followed was suffocating. Isabel felt no shock, only a cold, sickening confirmation of the fear that had been her constant companion since she had read Alara's confession. She was being priced, appraised, and traded. "He wants a wife," oh, Isabel finally stated, her voice devoid of emotion. "And Laurel Creek needs the water for his mill. He acquires the two most prized assets of the territory in one stroke." Hacker told him no, of course. Gaston erupted, his pride flaring up one last, weak time. "I would rather lose this land than sell my own flesh and blood to that monster." "But if you lose the land, Papa," Isabel countered, her logic devastatingly precise, "we have nothing. We have no home, no income, and your name is ruined forever. At least with this, we keep the graves. We keep the home. You keep your place in the valley, even if only nominally." Gaston turned and walked rapidly toward the house, leaving Isabel standing alone on the porch, staring at the ruined fields. She knew the truth. She had to agree. She had to walk into the fire, armed only with a ghost's warning and her own fragile resolve. Meanwhile, 20 miles away in Magnolia Ridge, Senator Darius Thorne finished his brandy, his mind already calculating the next move. He did not chase things. He orchestrated their arrival. His office was a testament to his coal control, mahogany, crystal, and not a single unnecessary decoration. He was a man who saw emotion as a flaw and people as a means to an end. He stood by the window looking down at the bustling street. He knew Gaston Laurent's pride was his weak spot. Laurent needed to be broken publicly before the deal was struck. It was a necessary part of the ritual of ownership. He summoned Samuel Blackwood, the nervous bank officer. "Have you made the necessary arrangements, Samuel? The event must be perfect, a display of both my generosity and my absolute power." "Yes, Senator. The town hall has been booked. The invitations are going out tonight. A formal engagement announcement to settle the debt. Though, sir, many people are already calling it an auction." Thorne's thin smile widened. "Let them call it what they wish. They will see it as an act of mercy away for a kind benefactor to save a noble Southern family from ruin. And they will see Isabel Laurent, a woman who knows her place, acquired, and beautiful. A wife who will keep my house quiet and provide a suitable heir for my empire." He tapped his finger on the desk, the sound sharp and final. He was thinking of Alara, his first wife. She had fought him with passive resistance, silence, and finally madness. Isabel, he judged, was stronger. She would be a greater challenge, and therefore a more satisfying prize. Far beyond the oppressive control of Thorne, in a secluded ravine near the old territorial lines, Elias Ashworth sat by a small smoking council fire. He was a man suspended between worlds, educated in the North by his scholar father, yet bound by the blood and honor code of his Muskogee Mother Oz people. He wore tailored, modest clothes now, but the Lakota bone breastplate lay wrapped nearby. He was in the region to investigate missing persons, young men who had left their communities to seek work, but had vanished near Thornoir's new mill. He suspected forced labor, perhaps worse. Thorne's reach was long and venomous. Elias listened to the local elders recounting the relentless encroachment. They spoke of the Laurent land Laurel Creek being seized. The old man, Gaston Laurent, he had a stubborn pride, said one elder. But 6 winters ago, when the fever took the children and the agent refused us medicine, Laurent was one of the few who brought the bitter herbs and thick blankets. He risked the ire of the town to do it. He saw us, a rare thing for a white man. A debt of honor, not money, Elias murmured, the words resonating deep within him. His people did not forget kindness, just as they did not forget injustice. He already knew the rumors about Thorne and the daughter. They were impossible to ignore. A man of honor falling, his daughter to be sacrificed to the same greedy hand that was crushing Elias' own people. Elias stood up, the shadow of the tall cottonwood trees falling across his face. His original mission was critical, but his conscience demanded intervention. "And I will go to Magnolia Ridge tonight," Elias told the elders. "Not sure I have enough saved not for medicine this time, but for a different kind of trade. I will attend this auction Thorne is staging." The eldest woman, her eyes sharp despite her age, gave him a warning that mirrored his own conflicted soul. Be careful, Elias. You walk among them, wearing the skin of the white man, but when you act, they will only see the blood of the savage. You try to pay a debt of honor with their money, but they will never allow a man like you to buy the freedom of a white woman. You will make an enemy of a powerful snake, and you will gain nothing but shame. Elias met her gaze, his expression resolute. Sometimes, elder, the greatest shame is to stand by and watch injustice become accepted law. He mounted his horse carrying the weight of his mission, his divided lineage, and a pouch of gold coins he had painstakingly saved. He was riding toward the town that hated him, toward a debt he had to pay, and toward a woman who would resent the very act of her own salvation. The day of the meeting was unseasonably warm, as if the valley itself had no right to mourn. The air smelled of dried cotton husks and the sour odor of debt. Isabel watched her father polish his boots until the leather shone like a lie. Gaston Laurent, obsessed with maintaining the outward appearance of dignity, was preparing for his final, futile negotiation with Senator Thorne. He moved with a kind of terrified rigidity, avoiding Isabel's eyes, avoiding the memory of his wife. In the small, dusty library, Gaston paused before the row of antique books in his grandfather's legacy. He ran a trembling hand over the worn leather spines. Milton, Pope, Cicero. They were the only things left that defined the Lawrence by their intellect, not their current failure. I won't ask you to come with me, Izzy, Gaston muttered, his voice thick. I know, Papa, Isabel replied softly. She stepped forward, placing a cool hand on his shoulder. And I will not run. Whatever his price, we will face it. Together or separately, we remain Laurence. She offered him strength, but inside she was already fighting the invisible chains. She thought of Ilara's silk ribbon, its ash already scattered by the wind. If I stay, I will die here. But if I run, Papa will lose his soul as well as his land. In his private office, Darius Thorne was reviewing the final land survey of Laurel Creek. He paused, not at the creek bed, but at the small designated square marked O Family Cemetery, Mont. He reached into a hidden drawer and pulled out a single, tarnished silver locket. It was Ilara Marge's. He held it, not with affection, but with an odd, controlling intensity. Ilara had tried to throw this locket into the river before she died, but he had retrieved it and controlled its final resting place. This was his human crack, the compulsion to own and contain what was broken or lost, to prove his will was absolute. He wasn't merely collecting assets. He was collecting symbols of others, the surrendered wills. He disliked messiness, and Ilara had been messy. Isabel, he knew, would be an immaculate, controlled possession. A knock interrupted his musing. Thorne put the locket away, the coldness instantly returning to his eyes. Send Laurent in. So, Gaston Laurent entered, radiating a mixture of pride and desperation. He placed the deed to the isolated spring house on Thornmoor's desk. I came to discuss an alternative arrangement, Senator. Gaston began, forcing his voice to remain steady. The water rights. A 99-year lease for a reduction of the principal loan. I offer you control over the future of the valley without taking my home. Thorne picked up the deed, but his attention was elsewhere. He gestured toward the threadbare chair, but Gaston remained standing a final, silent act of defiance. Ah, the stubbornness of the poor gentry. Thorne sighed, letting the deed fall. The water is irrelevant, Gaston. The mill requires certainty, not a contract that will be challenged in court by your heirs. What I acquire is the ultimate unchallenged control. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a confidential, utterly chilling tone. My offer remains. Isabel's hand. The debt is dissolved, and you remain on the land as a tenant manager naturally, or you have 27 days to produce the full 15,000. Think of the alternative. Isabel on the street, her name ruined, your line extinguished. Gaston felt the world tilt. Thorne wasn't just negotiating, he was performing an execution. Thorne then rose, walking slowly to his shelf of acquired artifacts, trophies of others' failures. Perhaps, Thorn mused, his eyes cold and calculating, we can find a way to satisfy your antiquated sense of honor. A symbolic down payment, shall we say? A gesture that this union is not merely transactional, but a merging of histories. Thorn then delivered the ultimate personal blow. I know of your grandfather's book collection, Gaston. A beautiful set. Bring those books to me tomorrow. I will keep them here, safe in my vault, as a symbolic down payment for your daughter's hand. Once I possess the memory of the Laurent name, I will consider our contract binding. Gaston stared, his breath seized in his chest. Thorn was demanding the surrender of his intellectual soul. The books represented everything Gaston had tried to shield from the brutality of the New South. You're suggesting I pawn my family's intellectual legacy for a promise? Gaston whispered, his voice shaking. I'm suggesting you secure your daughter's future with your past, Gaston, Thorn countered, smiling thinly. Refuse, and tomorrow the notice goes public. The shame of bankruptcy will be a far heavier burden than the loss of a few dusty volumes. Think of Isabel. She deserves better than the shame of the street. Gaston left the bank, his conscience utterly annihilated. He walked the streets of Magnolia Ridge, seeing no one. He realized Thorn had not just defeated him financially, but had successfully destroyed the core of his self-respect. Isabel was waiting on the porch when Gaston returned, the silence between them heavier than the debt itself. She already knew the answer. The way her father avoided the sight of the library window was enough. What did he ask for this time? Isabel finally asked. Gaston confessed the demand for the books. He saw the understanding and the sudden, profound grief in Isabel's eyes. He is forcing you to destroy the Laurent name, piece by piece, Isabel whispered. Gaston, unable to bear the sight of her pain, raged. I told him I would rather lose everything. I forbade it. But you cannot, Papa, Isabel said, her voice dropping to a low, chilling register of resolve. He is trying to break your spirit first. If we run, he wins. If you sell the books, you lose your honor. But if I marry him, you keep the land and you keep your life. She knew her decision was final. She spent the next day in the library. She did not cry. Instead, she methodically touched each spine, memorizing the weight, the scent, the history of each volume. This was her last act of communion with her past self. The final fear was no longer of death, but of spiritual conformity. She walked over to the burned spot where the silk ribbon had turned to ash. I will not be silent. I will not be broken. I will not be a Lara. I will do it, Papa. Isabel announced, finding Gaston staring blankly at the ceiling in the parlor. Gaston was horrified. No, I forbid it. I will not sell you. It's my choice, Isabel insisted, her voice strong and devoid of tremor. And I choose the land. This land is our legacy. I will marry Thorn, but I will not be broken. She walked into the library, picked up the box, and faced her father. Let me at least take these to him myself, Papa. Let me deliver the terms of my own destruction. Gaston watched her leave, his figure reduced to a defeated statue, realizing his pride had cost him everything, and Isabel was now walking toward a dark future to pay for his failure. In Magnolia Ridge that same day, Elias Ashworth moved with calculated caution. He had confirmed the rumors that young men from his community were being coerced into debt bondage at Thornmarmer's new textile mill. The injustice was deep, but his investigation was slow. He was preparing to leave when he saw a familiar wagon from the Laurent estate arrive at the bank. He watched as Isabelle Laurent, looking pale but resolute in a simple dress, carried a heavy wooden box, one containing the antique books, into the bank entrance, her father following behind like a ghost. Elias did not know the specifics, but the symbolism was unmistakable. The daughter delivering the family's soul as collateral for a forced contract. Later, he overheard the excited gossip outside the saloon. The official engagement announcement would be tomorrow night at the town hall. A public ritual of acquisition. Elias Ashworth, sitting alone in a cheap room above a livery stable, looked at the pouch of gold he carried enough to buy his way into a quiet life elsewhere. But the debt of honor, the injustice of a woman being bartered, and the deep, shared bond of being trapped by a controlling society forced his hand. He opened the pouch, the soft clinking of gold, the only sound. He would pay the price of freedom, not out of affection, but out of a fierce, cold obligation to justice and the code of honor his father and his mother-us people had taught him. He knew that intervening would link his fate irrevocably to Thorne's malice and the potential scorn of Isabel herself. But sometimes, Elias reflected, the most honorable act is the most foolish. A dry wind carried dust across the valley like the whisper of something ending. The air was thick with static electricity and the low, distant rumble of a storm that promised violence, not rain. Gaston Laurent stood paralyzed in the doorway of Laurel Creek, watching Isabel's wagon disappear toward the ridge that led to Thorne's bank. She was delivering the box of books, the final, humiliating installment on the debt of his pride. His mind was a maelstrom of regret. For the first time, he saw in her not merely his daughter, but the woman he had forged through his own pride. In a mirror of his ruin, he realized that he had spent 6 years fighting for the land while carelessly sacrificing the soul that made that land worth owning. He had forced her into a crypt to save his past. He sank into the dust-covered chair, the silence of the house pressing down. He was no longer a man of honor. He was a man who had auctioned his child. At the bank, Isabel carried the box of books into Thorne's office. The senator did not look at the titles. He only watched her. As Isabel placed the box on the edge of the desk, a physical separation between her inheritance and his greed. Thorne allowed a flicker of something akin to distorted admiration in his eyes. He saw her resolve, her controlled anguish. "You understand the terms, Miss Laurent," Thorne said, his voice softer than usual, laced with that chilling, patronizing quality. "You show remarkable composure. You understand the necessity of surrender. That is a lesson your father, tragically, never learned." Isabel met his gaze, refusing to flinch. "When I understand the necessity of survival, Senator, and I understand that sometimes the only way to save a soul is to put a body in jeopardy." Thorne smiled, a thin, satisfied curl of the lips. "Precisely. You will make a better wife than Alara ever did." He gestured to Samuel Blackwood. "Have these placed in the vault, Samuel. They are now secured." Isabel left, the transaction complete. Her fate was sealed for the following evening. The Clearwater Town Hall had been transformed into a cold, gilded spectacle. Crystal chandeliers cast a harsh, unforgiving light across the expectant faces of Magnolia Ridge Ocellite. Isabel, draped in the heavy emerald silk gown, stood on a small, raised platform beside Darius Thorne, the object of intense scrutiny. Her internal state was one of profound dissociation. She was merely flesh and silk, a prop in Thornwewer's masterful demonstration of power. Thornew's hand rested on the small of her back, possessive, constant pressure that was less a touch and more a public declaration of ownership. The air in the hall was heavy, thick with the scent of lilies and the sharp metallic tang of repressed tension. The string quartet played a delicate minuet, yet Isabel only heard the frantic drumming of her own heart beneath the layers of silk. Gaston Laurent stood nearby, his face pale and etched with shame. He was trapped between Samuel Blackwood and another large man, unable to reach his daughter, now a deliberate, ceremonial barrier designed to emphasize his impotence. Thorne raised his glass, the sound echoing through the sudden hush. He delivered his prepared speech, framing the exchange as an act of mercy, a securing of a lineage. Then the inevitable pivot. "However," Thorne announced, his voice ringing with false magnanimity, "in fairness to Miss Laurent, she deserves the very best. And to demonstrate the robust economic health of our community, I am willing to entertain competing offers for this exceptional hand." Gaston roared, struggling violently against Blackwood. "This was not our agreement, Thorne. You promised an announcement." Thorne barely spared him a glance. "The announcement is being made, Gaston. I am simply ensuring your daughter receives the maximum benefit. The starting bid, gentlemen, is $15,000. The exact debt. Do I hear a higher offer?" The bidding began, driven by the eagerness of the wealthy men to play the senator's game. It rose quickly, passing 20,000. Thorne, with a look of supreme confidence, raised his hand and silenced the room. $25,000. He turned, the smile of a triumphant predator fixed on his face, and reached for Isabel's right hand. "Come, my dear," Thorne cooed. "Let us finalize the contract before these generous gentlemen." Isabel looked down at his hand, then at his cold, possessive eyes. She knew this was the point of no return. This kiss would seal the spiritual death Ilara had warned her about. The silk of the dress felt like a straitjacket. As Thorne began to pull her hand toward his lips, Isabel executed the only act of rebellion left to her. She violently yanked her hand free. The sharp, audible sound of her palm tearing away from his glove cut the silence like a gunshot. Thornier's practiced smile evaporated, instantly replaced by a look of concentrated, terrifying rage. He seized her wrist, his fingers biting into her skin. This was the climax of the ceremony, the public display of control. Isabel gasped, her focus entirely on the cold pain, the sensation of physical violation disguised by the formality of the rite. "Control yourself, girl," Thorne hissed under his breath, his eyes radiating a primal threat. It was precisely in that moment, when Isabel's wrist was locked in Thorne's painful vice, and her soul felt on the verge of fracturing, that the heavy, oak rear doors of the town hall burst open with a sound that drowned out the gasps of the crowd. Every head snapped to the disruption. Elias Ashworth strode down the center aisle. He was dressed not as a scholar or a Southern gentleman, but in the traditional stark buckskin leggings and a dark woven shirt, with a single eagle feather and an unmistakable declaration of his heritage and intentions. At his waist, the revolver and knife were visible. A stunned, horrified silence fell. The quartet's music dissolved into a terrified squeak. Thorne released Isabel's wrist, momentarily distracted by the shocking invasion. "What is the meaning of this? Remove this savage, immediately." Elias ignored him. His dark eyes bypassed the furious senator and fixed directly on Isabel's face, his gaze steady, challenging, and strangely respectful. When he spoke, his voice was measured and powerful, cutting through the hollow's oppressive silence. $30,000. The crowd was frozen. Elias reached into a leather pouch and tossed it onto the nearest white-clothed table. The contents spilled out in a cascade of gold nuggets and American minted coins. "Greater $30,000, Elias repeated. "In gold, delivered now. Double your debt, Laurent. Unless you prefer your daughter to go to a man who sells land and collects broken souls." Thorne was incandescent with rage. "This is absurd. This is a private contract. I will not allow." Elias stepped forward, his eyes never leaving Thorne. "I thought the purpose of this auction was to accept the highest bid to secure Miss Laurent's future." Isabel, pulling her wrist free of Thorne's loosened grip, finally spoke, her voice strained but unbroken. "I have no intention of being claimed by anyone, Mr. Ashworth. This arrangement was only to settle my father's debt." Elias inclined his head, acknowledging her spirit. "Then allow me to settle the debt of honor owed to your father, with no claim on you, Miss Laurent." Gaston, his face a mess of tears and relief, started toward his daughter. Thorne quickly regained his composure, his face a frozen mask of lethal calculation. He knew he could not refuse the double bid publicly without confirming the transaction was illegal. "Very well. The deal is accepted. The Laurent debt is cleared," Thorne bit out, his voice venomous. His gaze shifted to Elias, pure malice replacing his mask of civility. "But remember, Blackhawk, this territory has laws against certain associations. Laws that are strictly enforced." Elias met his gaze, unflinching. "I know your laws, Senator, better than you know mine. Now leave. This place has grown poisonous." Isabel, gazing at the man who had bought her freedom at the price of becoming Thornier's next target, felt a chilling realization. She had been saved from one predator only to be thrown into the violent path of another. Her soul might be free, but her body and her reputation were now dangerously exposed. The chaos in the town hall had dissolved into a tense, stunned silence. Isabel stood trembling, her wrists smarting from Thorner's furious grip. Elias Ashworth, having just paid $30,000 in gold for her freedom, stood a discreet distance away, his presence radiating an unapologetic power that the Southern elite found intolerable. Gaston rushed forward, his face a mixture of weeping relief and utter bewilderment. He grabbed Isabel, holding her tightly, whispering apologies into her hair. "You're safe, Izzy. We're safe. The land is ours. Thank God, thank God." Isabel pulled back gently. Her eyes, however, were fixed not on her father, but on Elias, the man who had just saved her, why not as a hero, but as a disruptive force, was already being encircled by Thorne's men and the local sheriff. "Which we need to leave, Miss Laurent," Elias said, his voice flat and urgent. "You're now. Thorne will not let this humiliation pass." Isabel took a step toward him, her emerald silk gown suddenly feeling like the weight of the entire territory's judgment. She raised her head, her gaze piercing, and spoke the words that cut through the silence more sharply than the gold had. "Why, Mr. Ashworth?" she demanded, her voice low and dangerously steady. "Why did you buy me? Did you save me from being Thorne's property only to make me yours? You stood there and bought me like a slave, confirming the absolute truth that in this society, my freedom is a commodity, payable only in gold. Did you rescue me by purchasing me again?" Her anger was not directed at his intention, but at the act of transaction itself, the ultimate wound to her hard-won autonomy. Elias absorbed the accusation without flinching, his expression remaining utterly stoic. He knew this fury was earned, and he respected it. "Miss Laurent, he replied, his voice calm, yet carrying a profound weight. "I did not purchase you. I purchased the debt of your father. He once showed kindness to my people when all others chose cruelty. That kindness became a sacred debt of honor, which I paid in the currency your people understand, gold. The transaction is complete. You owe me nothing. You are free." The sheriff approached Elias, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Ever Ashworth, you're coming with me. We need to verify the source of this gold, likely stolen from the federal lands." Elias offered no resistance. He looked only at Isabel. "Go home, Miss Laurent, quickly. The debt is cleared, but the danger is not." As Elias was led away, escorted by several deputies, Isabel stood frozen. She had fought to be seen as a woman with agency, and her final act of rebellion was immediately erased by a man who treated her like a symbol in your debt to be paid. Gaston, bewildered, ushered Isabel out of the hall and into their carriage. He was too consumed by the financial relief to fully grasp the spiritual injury inflicted on his daughter. "He was an honorable man, Izzy. He was a savior." Gaston kept muttering, clutching the bank ledger that Samuel Blackwood had grudgingly handed over, marked "O paid in full." "He is a man who decided my value, Papa, just as Thorne did," Isabel whispered, looking back toward the town hall, where the sinister light still shone. The Lawrence did not ride home to relief. They rode toward the beginning of Thorne's second, more insidious revenge. The next morning, the financial relief was overshadowed by a crippling social disaster. Thorne had not openly fought Elias's gold, but he had leveraged his control over the newspapers and the social circuits. The lead story in the Magnolia Ridge Gazette was not about the cleared debt, but about the scandal. Headline: "Heiress traded for Black Hills gold. Thirst for land trumps honor." The article, cleverly worded by Thorne's lawyers, twisted the truth into a venomous social dagger. It claimed that Isabel's sudden engagement into the senator was a fabrication designed to cover up the Laurent family's true arrangement, to sell Isabel into an immoral cohabitation with Elias Ashworthian, untamed half-breed in exchange for a massive secret cash payout. The paper suggested that Gaston had used Thorne's genuine proposal as a shield to disguise his true, disgusting intent, to pawn his daughter off on a savage in an attempt to retain his worthless land. This was Thorne's true genius, not financial ruin, but the complete and permanent destruction of their social honor. The debt was paid, but the reputation was now irrevocably destroyed. Analysis: This strategic move ensures that Isabel and Elias are inextricably linked by a false narrative of shame. Elias is not just a hero, he is her ruin. Isabel is not just free, she is now a pariah, perpetually associated with a man deemed an outcast. When Isabel went to the market later that day, a necessary task, the atmosphere was thick with immediate, cutting condemnation. Women who had been her friends crossed the street to avoid her. Grocers refused to look her in the eye. Children were pulled away from her path. Isabel realized the terror of the town hall was nothing compared to the slow, burning hell of being deemed unclean by her own society. Thorn had effectively placed a permanent, invisible scarlet letter upon her and her entire family. She returned to Laurel Creek to find her father consumed by the new shame. He had read the paper and retreated into a profound, tearless despair. He was no longer worried about the land. He was drowning in the guilt of having sold his daughter's reputation. Gaston, huddled in the parlor, pointed weakly at the paper. "He didn't just take the land, Izzy. He took our name. He made us monsters." Isabel sat beside him, the realization cold and absolute. The shame that Thorn had planned for Gaston had now transferred entirely to her and her buyer. That evening, Isabel walked to the scorched spot where she had burned a larva silk ribbon. She looked at the moon, its light cold and distant. She was free from the contract, but bound by a lie. She was bound to the man who had bought her freedom. She made a silent vow of resistance. She would not allow Thornwor's lie, or any man's action, to define her value or her path. The abyss she had fallen into was not a place of defeat, but a starting point. She would fight Thorn, not for money or land, but for the truth of her soul, even if she had to do it beside a man the world hated. The focus was no longer on escape, but on retaliation. The battle for Laurel Creek was over. The war for honor had just begun. The air at Laurel Creek no longer smelled of cotton or dust, it smelled of shame. The final crushing act of Thorn's revenge. The rumor published in the Gazette Nyad achieved what the debt could not: total social ostracism. Isabel and Gaston were suddenly invisible to their neighbors. No wagons came up the long, skeletal driveway. The few hands that worked the remaining fields quit, unable to face the public taint of association. The land, though legally free, felt poisoned by the town's contempt. Gaston Laurent, the man who had valued his pride above all, was utterly broken. He did not cry, nor did he rage. He simply descended into a silent, bottomless pit of guilt. He spent his days in the dark parlor, staring at the empty space where the books had once been, the symbolic void mirroring the emptiness in his soul. He began to seek solace in the cheap, harsh whiskey Isabel managed to procure. "It's my fault, Izzy." "Oh," he would whisper to the dust motes dancing in the meager light. "I didn't just lose the land. I sold your good name to save a plot of dirt." Thorn knew. He knew the books meant nothing, but your reputation meant everything. Isabel found herself functioning with a grim, chilling efficiency. She was the one who managed the meager supplies, mended the broken fence posts, and stared down the occasional curious, malicious rider who ventured near the property line. The true abyss, she realized, was not destitution, but isolation. Isabel had been freed from Thorn's contract, but she was now permanently bound to Elias Ashworth by Thorn's vicious lie. She was forced to grapple with the bitter irony. The man who had paid for her freedom was now the source of her deepest shame in the eyes of the world. She thought constantly of the gold, of the brief, intense clash of wills in the town hall. "He saw me as a debt to be honored. The world sees me as a harlot bought by a half-breed." The two perceptions were equally dehumanizing, equally outside her control. One cold afternoon, she forced herself to return to the town hall. It was locked, but she stood outside, remembering the intense physical sensation of Thorn's hand on her wrist and the painful relief when Elias had interrupted. She finally allowed herself a single moment of rage, addressing the empty hall. "You tried to take my soul, Thorn, but you only succeeded in making me realize I never truly owned it until I refused your touch." The realization was a sharp, cold clarity. The physical danger was past, but the social war was ongoing. 3 days after the auction, under the cover of a dense early morning fog, A lone rider approached Laurel Creek. It was Elias Ashworth. He had been released from custody. The gold was verified as legally acquired through years of fur and mineral trading in the territories. But the local sheriff's release was accompanied by a clear, venomous warning: leave the territory and never return. Elias rode to the back of the property, near the silent cotton gin, avoiding the main house to spare Isabel any further public spectacle. Isabel, seeing the rider from the window, walked out to meet him. She wore a simple dark work dress, deliberately rejecting the emerald silk of the engagement. Elias dismounted, his posture one of guarded respect. He did not offer comfort or apology. "Miss Laurent," Elias said, his voice low, "I came to confirm that the documentation is clean. Your land is yours. I leave tonight and I will not return. Thornwarrer's reach is long, and my presence here only makes your life harder." Isabel walked closer, her eyes searching his face for something: regret, pride, anything that would allow her to categorize him. She saw only profound, cold weariness. "You came to pay your debt of honor, Mr. Ashworth," Isabel stated, her voice flat. "And in doing so, you traded one form of servitude for another. You have given me freedom from debt, but bound me to a monstrous lie that will follow me for the rest of my life. Was the debt to my father worth the ruin of my name?" Elias looked away toward the silent, empty fields. "Honor has its price, Miss Laurent, and true freedom cannot be purchased. It can only be reclaimed. I did what I had to do for my people, to pay a debt that kept my people alive years ago. The rest is thorn's poison, and I regret the suffering it causes you." He then reached into his saddlebag, pulling out a small, tightly wrapped package, not gold, but a few small, smooth stones and a pouch of dried herbs. "And this is not payment," Elias explained. "This is a gift from my people. The herbs are for healing, the stones are for strength. They are meant to remind you that not all life is measured in the paper of banks or the laws of men. They are a debt you owe to no one." He placed the package on the ground between them, neutral ground, unclaimed by either of them. Then, without another word, he mounted his horse. "Goodbye, Miss Laurent." "Goodbye, Mr. Ashworth," Isabel replied, her voice barely a whisper. He rode off into the receding fog, leaving Isabel standing alone, holding the package of wilderness remedies, a gift from the world that had both saved and cursed her. Isabel returned to the house. She found Gaston asleep in his chair, a half-empty bottle of whiskey tilted precariously on the floor. She did not wake him. She went to the window, watching the sun finally break through the oppressive fog. She walked to the hearth, where the last remnants of Alara's silk ribbon had been burned. She picked up a splinter of wood and used it to scratch a phrase onto the dust of the mantelpiece. "I will not be Alara." Her spirit was not broken, it had been hardened. She had lost her honor in the eyes of society, but she had saved the soul of her father, and she had retained her own fierce resolve. She looked at the reflection of herself in the dark, dusty window glass. Her dress simple, her face scarred by exhaustion and resolve. She was free but utterly alone, and her path was now defined by the wreckage of two Menno's decisions, Thorn's malice and Elias's honor. She picked up the box of the books she had retrieved earlier from the town hall. Thorn had contemptuously returned them and placed them back on the shelf, not as symbols of past glory, but as tools for future battle. Isabel made her final silent vow. She would stay at Laurel Creek. She would rebuild, not to reclaim her honor in the eyes of Magnolia Ridge, but to prove that a woman once bought and publicly shamed could reclaim her entire worth through sheer unrelenting will. She would become the quiet, enduring force that Thorn had tried and failed to extinguish. She was in the abyss, but the abyss was where she would finally learn how to truly stand alone. The war with Thorn had not ended. It had merely shifted terrain from the marketplace to the heart. The story ends with Isabel putting the small, hard stones from Elias into the pocket of her work dress, walking out to the ruined fields, ready to begin the long, solitary labor of planting the next crop.